Hi, my name is Anna Sharkey. I am with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology at Xavier University, and I will be presenting on the misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder in African Americans. Research has shown that African Americans are at a higher risk of false positives for more severe mental disorders such as schizophrenia because symptoms of bipolar disorder are misattributed. Clinical factors that may contribute to this misdiagnosis are cultural bias, misattribution of symptoms, and pathologizing cultural concern. Provider bias is the main takeaway from these factors. It means that providers may not be taking into account the intersectionality and uniqueness of each African American client. When this occurs, there is an increased risk of misattribution of symptoms. So it is important to be sensitive to racial and ethnic differences in symptom expression. Research studies have shown this to be especially true when comparing African Americans and European Americans. A study done by Wally and colleagues showed that distrust and social desirability predicted the odds of a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia in their sample of African Americans, with cultural mistrust being positively associated. Another study showed African Americans were more likely to display persecutory or jealous delusions and hallucinations. I bring this up to recognize pathologizing cultural concern. Historically, paranoia in African Americans has only been viewed through a pathological lens and not a cultural lens, such that feelings of exclusion or reactions to racism-related trauma may be mistaken as a symptom of schizophrenia instead of culturally based paranoia. When we look at other barriers to receiving a correct diagnosis of bipolar disorder, we have to consider cultural mistrust, which affects the therapeutic process. Historical trauma and personal experiences of racism, discrimination, and oppression may contribute to the cultural suspiciousness some African American clients present with. Beyond psychoeducation and reducing the stigma of mental health, it is essential for providers to effectively communicate, form rapport, and practice cultural sensitivity. Primary care physicians and emergency services are more easily accessible to marginalized communities. Research has shown that African Americans overutilize these settings, which may lead to misdiagnosis. This might occur because assessments might not be standardized and the provider lacks sufficient knowledge of DSM criteria. The ascertainment bias refers to research, and it prevents advances in the diagnosis of bipolar disorder in African Americans. Historically, they have been excluded and underrepresented in studies, and currently there still is a trend of biased samples and a lack of participation. Whenever we look at the best practices, we want to minimize this disparity by standardizing diagnosis, which includes adhering to the DSM criteria and using at least semi-structured clinical interviews, cross-cultural sensitivity training, the psychosocial model, which is the biological, psychological, and social factors. And I want to stress the social factors because this involves cultural stressors and social stressors. Also, we have interprofessionally integrated care, which is pretty self-explanatory. We could all enhance diagnosis through increased communication between providers and consulting on cases where more severe diagnoses may be indicated. Thank you for joining me in my presentation, and I hope you receive something positive out of it. Thank you.